Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that educates you about your rights and recourse to those violated. My name is Mahlatse. The story of South Africa's first democratic elections is one that deserves retelling, not just in every generation or at election time, but as a fundamental part of history. South Africa's first democratic elections 20 years ago marked a culmination of negotiations and transitions that the country emerged from a brutal legacy of systemic racial segregation and oppression. South Africa's discriminatory laws and resistance to those injustices date back centuries. But the story of its democracy began to unfold just 4 years before the first democratic elections. Today on Rights and Recourse, in the aftermath of South Africa's fifth democratic elections, we examine the road traversed thus far over the last 20 years, including the preparation for the trials and tribulations of these elections. To discuss this topic, we are joined by Honourable Member of the Kenyan Parliament, Mr. John Munuve, International Observer, Mr. Tselane, Deputy Chairperson of the Independent Electoral Commission, Ms. Mahlatse Gallens, Deputy Editor of SABC Radio News, and at our Cape Town studios we are joined by Professor Pierre from the University of Cape Town. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Terry, first of all, we must congratulate the IEC for a job well done. It's been a tough job doing this. You had very little sleep.
Thank you very much. As I was saying to you earlier on, if I fall asleep during this interview, please wake me up nicely and gently. But we ran a very smooth operation, and we are quite happy with what we've been able to achieve. We had, like in any election, minor difficulties here and there, but in the overall, I think this was one of the best well-run elections that we've ever had in this country. We managed to release the results the quickest we have ever done in the history of our organization, the history of our democracy, and I think that is wonderful. In terms of our legislation, we are required to release and announce the results within 7 days. We always set ourselves a target of 3 days, and going into these elections, we set ourselves again the target of 3 days, and on the second day, we were already done.
Mr. Munuve, we've seen a number of observers coming from countries north of us in Africa, coming to observe. Some of them say they're coming to learn, but we see very few countries where this is replicated.
Well, it's quite interesting because electoral commissions are very different from country to country, how they are formed, their independence. The political realities are also very different. I wouldn't say, right now, not many countries are coming to learn. They're just coming to affirm what they know. The problem is, do they practice what they see when they go back to their capitals? Your neighbors, for example, here, up north.
I didn't want to name them.
I don't want to name them, but I've been there, and it's not for want of knowledge. I mean, elections have become a science, more or less. There's a SADC principles on free and fair election. There is the Durban Protocol, which is signed by all member states of the African Union. So it's not bad elections, and fiddling with elections is not for because people don't know what they should do. It's because there's a certain result that must be achieved.
Mahlatse, these elections, how different have they been from elections elsewhere in Africa? I know you covered the elections in the Congo, and also how different have they been from the elections we've had before?
I think maybe the Congo being the latest that I covered in 2011, one of the differences is dealing with logistics, because that can be a nightmare, especially delivering ballots. Some of our countries on the continent are very rural, they are very isolated, there's no access to some of those places. I remember in Congo, one of the biggest challenges when South Africa had to come in was with delivering those ballots to all of the places across this vast country. And I think we have managed to get that right. I mean, already days before the elections here, the IEC was already saying that we've actually started the process of delivering those ballots, and they're now just waiting for election day to actually open up. And also I think that the difference is the transparency and the confidence in the IEC. I think if there's one government institution that we all support and are all united and believe in what the work that they do is the IEC. And that is quite crucial, having confidence in the electoral body. And in a lot of those countries, there's always suspicion in terms of who actually leads that process, and also in terms of can we trust the system. And I think these elections, despite the problems that we had, they were declared free and fair, credible, and people have trust in that system, especially even with what we saw towards the election with calls for the IEC chairperson to actually step down. And I think they were able to ride above all of that. We saw all the parties accepting the results, the outcome, therefore.
We'll come back to that. There are very interesting stories I read about Mr. John Munuve, who he said in some countries he saw the voters' roll being at the back of a hardcover. Professor, what were your observations regarding these elections compared to previous ones?
Well, I don't think there was much of a difference, except, of course, the first democratic election in 1994, which was, because it was the first one, because of logistical problems, because the IFP only came on board at the last minute, and because nobody had organized an election like that, there was no voters' roll or whatever. That was quite chaotic, to be fair. Since then, the elections have always been more or less smoothly managed and run. And one of the reasons for that is exactly because the IEC is an independent body. In the Constitution, guaranteed their independence, and the appointment of commissioners is taken one step away from the political process to make sure that not only the people on the commission are really impartial, but they are also perceived to be impartial. I think that's important. It's going to be interesting in the years to come to see whether this remains the case if the elections become more competitive, because of course we all knew beforehand who was going to win.
Well, if you'd like to join us on today's discussion, you can call us on 714-1619 or 714-1618, 714-6919 or 6918. And you can talk to us on Twitter. Rights and Recourse will be back after the break. Welcome back, and if you'd like to join us and be part of this discussion, you can call us on 714-6918 or 6919 or tweet us on Rights Recourse. Mr. Tselane, obviously the elections do not start with the elections themselves. They start way back with registration. What were the problems regarding registration? Were there any problems regarding the registration?
Actually, the elections start much earlier than that. You've got to firstly deal with issues of demarcations. The demarcation of boundaries for either municipalities or for the provincial areas. And immediately after that, you get that information, you're using it through what we call the delimitation. In other words, we delimit the areas that have already been demarcated, and we receive this information from the demarcation board, because as you may be aware, the demarcation of wards and demarcation of boundaries, it is not the responsibility of the IEC. There is an organization that has been established to deal with those. So you get that information, and immediately after getting that information, you begin now to take that information to make sure that you can create voting districts, and that process, we call it the delimitation process. Once you have done that, it is then that you actually now can begin the process of registration. You may find that as a result of the boundaries of the municipalities or boundaries of the provinces, you have actually now cut the districts, and you have to find a way of accommodating that particular process. So in doing that, we will introduce what we call targeted registration to go to those areas, inform those people that have been affected, and now they've got to re-register in order for them to be properly in the areres where they belong.
There's another thing, quickly, before you go there. There's another thing, that probably you should put that in your answer. The IEC has gone to great lengths to try and get the youth to come in and vote and register to vote.
Absolutely. Now, having done that, you then have got to, we open up all our voting stations. This time around, we had 22,263 voting stations and voting districts. So you've got to open them and for people to be able to go and register. And those who have moved since the last elections, they can also re-register. But you can also be able to check your details and check as to whether you are on the right segment of the voters' roll. So these things, once you are completed, you've completed that particular process, then you are ready to go into other processes which we normally have within the election timetable. But you've got to proclaim the election date first, and then after that we deal with all those other things. I can be able to give you more information on those if you are interested in that. But now, the issue that you are raising in terms of the youth, we felt going into these elections that this was a 20-year of our democracy. You had a new generation of voters that were going to be voting for the first time. Those who were born in 1994 being the year when we had our first democratic elections. We had to try to find a way of reaching out to this category of people. And we use multifaceted strategies, one of which was to begin to take the use of social media very, very seriously. We became very, very strong on Twitter. We became strong on Facebook. And these platforms are platforms that really helped us in terms of accessing the youth. But we also identified what we call the youth ambassadors, and we use these youth ambassadors also to try to inspire confidence in the process and to try to make participation in the electoral process much more cooler, much more sexy.
It does want to say, I saw it does want to say
I had
sexy.
to get it from Mahlatse.
The question, Mahlatse, is, and Mr. John Munuve, probably for you, Professor, down there, what happens is, these are the 5th elections for South Africa. What normally happens in many countries, as you go into your elections, your numbers of people who go and vote drop and drop. Even the people who register drop. And what does it say about the credibility of those elections?
I think we've been lucky in South Africa because we've seen an increase in the number of people that register to vote and also in the turnout, 18 million people coming out. But I also think that it's about confidence in the system. People want to vote, understanding that their voice is going to be heard and will translate in some change in their lives. And in South Africa, we still have a new democracy. There is still excitement around the democracy. And I think the 20-year mark also energized these particular elections. And I also think the entrance of new parties also, rejuvenated, as to speak, the whole process. And I think we should really be grateful for that and thank the South African public for coming out and participating in the elections. But it will be interesting to see if that trend will actually continue.
What do you do to inspire people to come in and register to vote and vote at the same time as they have registered?
29 political parties, each one of them claiming to have a constituency, surely will drum up support and will basically get the populations out to come and vote, because each one of these has a constituency, I believe, and because they have a constituency, that constituency is going to come up and then, by the way, 80% turnout is one of the highest voter turnout that I've seen. So in the South African case, I think having 29 political parties, each one of them having a constituency that wants their party to be on the table in parliament and whatever else, basically helped to whip the sentiments and the spirit of the voter to come out.
Earlier, I read somewhere that you were saying you would have wanted to be here during the registration time.
Yes. Basically what I was saying is that elections are not won or lost on the voting day. It's a process. And for me, as an election observer expert, I would have liked to be here in the registration, the campaign, because, coming to just observe the voting day, I felt shortchanged. But all the same, the results, I think, did prove that, and what I saw proved that the IEC worked very well, and that the wishes of the South African people were actually carried in the ballot.
Well, remember, if you want to join us, please call us on 011 714 6919 or tweet us on Rights and Recourse. So we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. Professor De Vos, there seems to be a lot of things that were surprising in these elections, like the party down in Matatiele that garnered about 84,000 votes and got themselves 3 seats in parliament. Now they've to change their whole makeup and become a national party rather than a party for Matatiele.
Well, that is one very strange thing. Of course, they would claim that all the people who voted for them did vote for them honestly and not because they confused them with the ANC. But it is quite strange. It is a bit of an anomaly. And there's actually a provisions in the Electoral Act to say that political parties can object to other political parties who register if those political parties, their names or their colors or whatever, are too similar that it could create a confusion. So maybe the ANC will have to look at that. But what I found interesting about the election, and maybe a little bit surprising, is 2 things. The first one is that in Limpopo province, the percentage of people who went to vote was actually only in the 60s. That was very low. I don't know, I don't know why that is. Perhaps one of the arguments that's being made that if people believe that there is not really a competition in the election, if they already know who's going to win, then they are less likely to go and vote. So
Professor, just hold that thought. Or is it gone? It's not there. We thought we had a caller online, and the caller decided to drop us because we continued to speak. You can carry on, Professor. You seem to be having a story there which we want to latch on to.
The second thing that I think if you drill down in the election results, it's actually quite interesting to see that voters in specific areas, their voting patterns differ considerably depending on the local circumstances. So if you go and look at the Marikana area, for example, the voting patterns there look very different. So the whole Rustenburg area, it looks very different from the rest of the Northwest. So I think that suggests that many voters actually do vote not only blindly out of loyalty for one party or another, but about local circumstances. And I think we will see more and more of that as we go forward to new and different elections.
Well, surely, Mr. Tselane, it does happen, as the professor says, points out. We pointed out AIC from Matatiele. There's another party from Bushbuck-Ridge that was also looking at local issues. Did you find that kind of thing as you were going along with the votes, that people look at local issues rather than national issues, but then they find themselves being thrust into the national issues like this party from Matatiele now?
Well, it's a subject that I'm not really an expert on.
Yes, I know. Probably I should say, this party from Matatiele was fighting for a local issue because they were in KwaZulu-Natal, and they were moved to, with this delimitation and demarcation you were talking about, they were moved to the Eastern Cape, and there were problems there.
But I think that's quite good in strengthening democracy. Maybe they're feeling that the issues that they're raising cannot be addressed necessarily at a local government level. So let's start making inroads provincially to make sure that the voices of the people are actually heard. And that's also a movement in the sense that protests are not the only way to actually make sure that your voices are heard, but let's use the democratic system that is available and go to the provincial legislature, and there we'll be able to raise and continue raising those issues. And I think that is quite a growth in our democracy. But also from what Professor De Vos was saying, some of the changes that we're seeing are also within the local metros themselves. When we compare with the general elections of 2009 and these ones, I mean, we saw the ANC losing quite a support in some of these places, 7 out of the 8 metros, and we've seen on the other side the DA growing in the Nelson Mandela Bay, in Buffalo City, and then we've also seen the EFF making inroads. And all of these figures, of course, become even more crucial for political parties because 2016 is the local government elections, and I'm sure they'll be using these figures as they prepare for that. But I think it's quite important that these communities that have been protesting are seeing themselves as part of the democratic system and hoping to make their voices heard there.
Let's take this call on the line. Tanda from Klerksdorp, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me and the Mateza and your guest. I've got I've got a question for Tselane. I've just seen on the TV, the Arrival news channel, that there were so-called the dumped ballot papers. Is that true, and has it been attended? If not, is it going to be attended, and when? And what would be the remedy to that? And second issue, you just hinted on the demarcations. Since we are now preparing for the 2016 elections, I would like to know as to whether who decides amongst on the issue of demarcations, like for instance in the local municipalities amongst the wards. Is it you, the IEC, or is it
the demarcation board? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tselane.
Yeah, thank you.
As I indicated earlier on, matters related to demarcation, it is not something that falls within our realm as an organization. We're only responsible for demarcation of our own voting district, and we don't even call it demarcation, so that people do not actually confuse what we do with what the demarcation board does. Demarcation board is responsible for the wards, demarcation for the boundaries of the provinces, as well as of the municipalities. From our side, the only thing that we're responsible for is the voting district. So that we call the delimitation process. In relation to the question that the first question that he raised about the
ballot boxes,
ballot papers and ballot boxes, this is something that we are looking into. But what is at least a source of comfort for us is that the results of all those areas were captured. There was voting that took place, and that these ballot papers, unfortunately, were abandoned after the process of counting and announcement of the results had already been done. So it did not really have any impact whatsoever in terms of the determination of the final results. But in terms of public perception, I think it has really done a lot of damage. And it's a matter that we're going to be dealing with internally. Immediately when we're done with the rollback, we're going to be doing an audit of what we have, what we don't have, and we're going to have to do something to make sure that we do not have a recurrence of this.
I think I heard on this issue of the ballot papers that were picked up in Linwood in Pretoria. I think I heard the leader of the Democratic Alliance saying if those ballot papers were needed for recounting, if there was an objection, then they would not be there for recounting.
No. If they were to be needed, they would not be there. But remember that in terms of the objections, political parties understand this. They've got a particular period, they've got about 48 hours within which they can actually object to a result. And we went through that particular process. Before we announce the results of an election, we allow any party to lodge an objection. We call this Section 55 objections because in terms of the legislation, we're saying these are the objections that are material to the determination of the final results of an election. So the Commission would not be able to announce the results unless all those matters have actually been raised. So we don't expect any political party at this stage to be raising an issue of objection. But it is important that we have those. We have 6 months within which we're supposed to be keeping the ballot material, rather the election materials, and then those that we want to dispose of, we dispose of them after 6 months. Our officials are supposed to understand this, and every person has been taught this. And for people now, after having completed the process of counting, voting and counting, and declaration of the results of that particular station, to leave the material in a station and say, I will get this in a day or two after I've had a rest, I think it is really irresponsible. And as I said, can compromise the integrity of our organization unnecessarily.
Mr. Munuve, earlier we spoke about local issues being brought out in this election, and local issues, and you made reference to you represent a constituency in Kenya, and that constituency wants you to raise the issues of that particular place in Parliament.
Yeah, you see, when you have a system such as you have, loyalty to the party, which might not be loyalty to the voter, which, could get everybody to bigger places. In Kenya, we campaign as individuals. You campaign at your party level with 10, 15 people for nomination. The party conducts a nomination, which is actually it's more difficult in some cases than the election itself. Because if a party is popular in a particular area, you know that once you get over that threshold, you have made it. So you compete with 10, 15 people for party nomination before you meet the other nominated candidates from other political parties for the actual election. Now, what this does is that you are actually embedded in the people. They know you, and they have tested you not once but twice during the nomination of the party and the actual final election. And they can make a call because you have to tell them what you do differently as opposed to this one and that one and that one. Now, when it's a party list, all you need to do is to be good to the party big whips.
You had a name for that.
Well, I don't want to. I mean, you can get joyriders who basically make sure that the party chiefs are given tea and are well, treated every time, and they stand up when the party leader calls. They stand up when you call me, sir, and that way you get yourself on the list all the time. But you don't necessarily pursue anybody.
Okay, Mr. Munuve, we'll come back to that. Please join us on telephones and on Twitter. Talk to us if you want to talk to us. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back, and if you'd like to join us, please call us on 714-6919 or 6918. Let us listen into what some election observers have to say about our election process.
The African Union Mission hereby presents its preliminary findings and recommendations based on its consultations and observations up to the close of polling and counting on 7th May 2014. A detailed final report of the mission will be shared with relevant authorities in South Africa after the elections.
The mission noted that the parties conducted themselves in accordance with the electoral law, and the mission observed that on election day, millions of South Africans enthusiastically made their way to the polling stations, patiently queued, and took their turn to vote.
Welcome back, and that was Mr. John Kufuor, former president of Ghana, was leading the AU delegation that was out here as observers. And let's go, first of all, before I go into my panel, to go to Mzwandile, who's on the line. Mzwandile, good afternoon. Welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Oh, thanks. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Okay. My question is directed to Mayor Mahlatse Gallens.
Yes.
I'm concerned about all the strikes that are happening in the townships, in particular for service delivery. Then SABC would come and cover those strikes or violent protests, which are illegal. Can't the SABC, in terms of assisting community members, send an investigative journalist to establish as to what actually happened with who failed to deliver the main services that were supposed to be delivered to the communities? Instead of going there and
Mzwandile, we've got your question. We've got a question. Give us a chance to answer your question. Mahlatse,
I would also want Professor DeFoss to comment on that.
Okay.
Because those who failed to deliver services must be exposed in terms of.
We've got that. Thank you very much. Mahlatse, I want you to put that also in your question. Please give us the sense of how the media covered the elections around that, probably even prior to the elections.
I think maybe to start off with the protests that we've been seeing across the country is that, you know, we always try where we can to be able to go back once the violence has ended to find out what exactly are the issues, because I think it's not only perhaps just the SABC but the media in general. We've come up with this theme called service delivery protests, but not all the time is it around service delivery protests. We've heard that in some of the communities, for example, it's basically councillors jostling for power and rounding up communities and then the protests happening. So I think we do need to be specific as the media to say this is the reason why people are protesting. If it is about delivery of services, what are those services? Is it water? Is it electricity? Is it the delivery of houses? But I think in terms of this elections, I think the media really came to the party. I mean, we have been... especially for the SABC, the election day is really a big process. For us, one of our advantages is that because we've got offices across the country, we're able to give everybody a voice and give a reflection of what the day was like for South Africans from rural areas in the Northern Cape to the suburbs here in Johannesburg. And social media, using that as well, that has come through. A lot of media were using social network. But I also think that the SABC website that was launched for the elections is quite a good resource, even after the elections, to actually see some of the finer issues in terms of details, which voting district voted which way. And I think it's a resource that the public can continue to use.
Professor De Vos out in Cape Town, one of the problems, one of the anomalies, Zwandile asked you to also come in on that point, but I want you to add this point. And one of the issues in all the areas where there have been huge service delivery protests, Bekkersdal, Gugulethu on the East Rand, and some other parts of the Western Cape, the ANC has been returned with big numbers back to Parliament in those areas.
Yes, well, that brings us actually, the 2 points are actually, I think, linked. And that is that when we talk about a free and fair election, it's not only what happens on election day and in the counting of votes that's important. It's also whether there is more or less an equal playing field for all the political parties before the election, during the election campaign. And here the media actually plays a big role. And of course, there have been accusations against the SABC that it is not always as impartial as it should be. The EFF, for example, have been complaining that the SABC hasn't covered enough of its election campaign. And many of the voters depend on the SABC far more than on printed media. The SABC is by far the most powerful media house. So I think the SABC, it's important that the SABC remains independent and impartial in how it reports. And many people argue that they have not been as impartial as they should have
Professor,
been.
we have a caller. Professor, we have a caller on the line. I think let's take that caller. Mzi in KwaZulu-Natal. Good afternoon. Welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Mzi.
Hello, Dr. Mateza. How are you?
Well, thanks. How are you?
Yes, I'm still on the line. I'm here.
Where is that, Mzi or Mzwandile?
Okay. The point I wanted to make...
Yes, Mzi, go ahead. Make your point.
Okay. The point I wanted to make is to say the IEC... Yes, is to say the IEC has worked very hard for all of us. We should continue to congratulate them for that.
Is that the only point you wanted to make?
No. I want to see the issue which we need to deal with going forward.
What is that we need to do? We seem to be losing Mzi.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on in this line.
Yes, Mzi, we seem to be losing you.
Is that the ICC should be careful to keep its integrity intact going forward. If we can avoid things that nearly happened with the chairperson of the IEC, well, that's how things become bad in all countries. If we can avoid that and keep our IEC with its integrity, we will be no any problems in the country. That's why today we are very happy.
Okay, Mzi, we got the gist. We got the gist of your. We got the gist
Thank
of your
you.
question. We should continue. Mzi said we should continue to congratulate the IEC. They've done a great job. The IEC must keep its nose clean, and obviously we know we can't go to that point of the chairperson of the IEC because that point is sub judice. Probably we should talk about what form of voter education did take place, Mr. Tselane?
Well, we've used quite a number of strategies to try to cover that area. We've had a relationship with community-based organizations and civil society organizations. We have used them. We have used our officials. We appointed quite a number of outreach personnel that were all out there on the ground trying to...
I'm saying somewhere that the IEC, in my preparations, that the IEC becomes the biggest employer this time of the year.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we've got quite a number of people who then participate in our processes. And as I suggested to you earlier on, we also use social media platforms to try to reach particularly the youth and those people who are active.
We have another call out the line. It's Adriano. Adriano, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Adriano?
Hello?
Yes, Adriano, what's your question?
No, I think it's a mix-up. I'm not Adriano.
Oh, what is your name? Just tell us your name and ask your question.
My name is Morris. I'm calling from KZN.
Yes, what's your question?
First of all, I would like to congratulate IEC. Secondly, I learned that we had a lot of election observers.
Yes.
So what is their role, actually? Do they have authority in case they find something wrong? Because I learned that we had more than 70 locally, which are coming from South Africa, and the others from the continent.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Mr. Munuve is here to tell us exactly what's the role of observers, especially international observers. I think you did touch on that before.
You see, in an election process, you've got election observers and monitors. And observers basically observe the process. They don't influence, they cannot correct, they cannot question the election officials, they just observe and give their verdict in terms of a report at the end of the day that the elections were flawed in this way or that way. If there is always recommendations to the National Election Commission so that they can correct themselves. So the observers are basically passive, they are not active participants in the process, as opposed to monitors. Monitors can actually tell a presiding officer that this booth is not placed well, you know, what do you think? But observers, but many people don't actually know that role, don't know the difference, because there is a difference between observers and monitors. International observers basically observe and make their recommendations and their verdict. And also, they give some kind of comfort to the country that our brothers and sisters from other countries have come here to observe this process.
We've got another call on the line. I'm sorry, Mr. Munuve, but we've got another caller. Lucas, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Lucas, what is your question? You sound very upbeat.
I'm just asking, sir, about those ballot papers that were found in the rubble, somewhere in Pretoria or where else. Now, my worry is this. Let's say I'm staying in that area, I went to vote the morning, and thereafter I see ballot papers. I see ballot papers found by children in a rubble. What should I think? Should I think that, oh, look, see my ballot paper get lost or it was stolen by thugs? How do the IEC control the polling stations? Thank you, so that the ballot papers must not get lost.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Lucas. I think that ballot paper issue was responded to extensively in yesterday's press conferences and on Friday press conferences by the Chief Electoral Officer and the IEC. And Mr. Tselane, you have responded to that here. Probably just to give Lucas some sense of comfort, you can just repeat what you said.
The ballot papers that were found are ballot papers that were abandoned after the whole election process was completed. You know, so this did not have any effect whatsoever. They were counted already, and the results were captured in the results slip, and we can account for all the result slips, which means we basically have got the results of all the voting stations in our country. So those ballot papers are ballot papers that were no longer of any use for the election purposes. But the point that I've raised earlier on is that to the extent that they were abandoned, even if the process had already been completed, it creates problems for us, and it's a matter that we're going to be dealing with after the elections.
But we to us as journalists, it's always a novelty to know which parties that entered the the elections and paid a deposit have lost their deposits?
Yeah, I think we've got about, is it 16 that will lose those deposits?
You had 29 now, only 13 have actually qualified to be at the National Assembly level. So I think the remaining then are the parties that are going to be losing their deposit. You've got to have a seat in Parliament
in order to keep your deposit.
In order to keep your deposit.
But I think it's an issue that has been raised towards these elections, and I'm assuming the new parties that are in Parliament might want to have a relook at the laws around entering and contesting an election, because some have said that it is quite expensive, but then one wonders if you didn't have that deposit, how long the list would actually be. I mean, Congo, where I covered the election, it was literally pages and pages and pages. But also, you know, the ballot paper was just pages and pages. But also, it's also about a thriving democracy when you have a lot more voices in participating in those elections, especially if it's constituency-based.
Quickly, we have Tembisile on the line. We'll take Consider's question and then we can answer it after the break. Tembisile, what's your question?
Umbuzo womhlekazi ukubana phofu kokuqala ndifuna ukubulela i-IEC ngomsebenzi omhle abawenzileyo. Congratulations on that. They've done a good job. Umbuzo wami ukubana ingabana i-IEC ayinakwazi namhlanje lento iyenze electronically leyo elections ngobana kulento yokulahleka kwe-ballot papers mhlawumbe ingayinceda loo nto.
And what's the Tembisile? Alfred from Soweto is also on the line. Alfred, good afternoon.
Afternoon, how are you, sir?
Fine, thanks, how are you? Go ahead, Alfred.
You? I'm right, and you?
I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to find out something from. I mean, I just want to give warning for these parties. See, if the party that wins. And I'm not good in English, but please understand. If a party wins, and those who toy against self-delivery, if they find out they are the ones who vote for those parties, they should be arrested, unless if this is opposite of the party. And the other thing, I just want to give a warning for the ANC. I just want to ask this movement when they go and apologize in Baghdad, but she said she don't need their vote for ANC. Now they see they've got 50% and DA got 10%, so which means they need their voters. So I just want to ask you to go and apologize in Baghdad. Thanks.
Thank you, Alfred. After the break, we'll come back to you. You can also phone us like Alfred and the rest of the others on 794-6918. It gives us enough time, the break, to translate what Tembisile was talking about, and we'll come back to you after the break. Welcome back to Rights and Recourse, and thank you for staying with us here on Rights and Recourse. First of all, let's try and answer Tembisile's question. Terry.
We are in the process of investigating possibilities of introducing electronic voting. But you must remember that electronic voting, you introduce it after you've really been able to create a very high degree of trust, particularly from the population in general. If you do not have those mechanisms in place and the results are questioned, people thinking that you manipulated technology to produce a particular outcome, then you will have serious problems. Yes. So it is one of the things that we've got to look into very, very carefully. And there are pros and cons. The truth of the matter is that if you're using electronic voting, you'll be able to get the results much quicker. But at the same time, if there is a problem with the machine, what do you do?
Professor De Vos, this probably is a question I should throw to you as a professor. You might be able to answer that question better.
Well,
Terry tried to answer that question, and because yes. I heard somebody ask, if you then have to have a recount of how do you do that if you're voting electronically?
Yes. Well, I might be a professor, but I have no clue about the IT issues. But I do understand that there's usually electronically there's mechanisms through which you can trace who voted and for whom they voted and so on. But I think it's also very important that we don't want to have a situation where we use electronic voting systems and people don't believe it, or they think that the machines have been cheated or whatever.
Absolutely.
And as we have seen with this last election, even though the IEC, there are so many checks and balances in place, including the fact that party agents must be in every voting station and they must sign off, there are still people who get very hysterical and very nervous about any kind of reports of irregularity. So I'm not sure yet whether we are ready for electronic voting in South Africa.
Well, let's go back to our lines. We've got Z on the line. Z, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hello.
Zion from King Williamstown.
Hello, Tums.
Yes, Zion.
I would like to ask from the honorable man of the IEC, this time around I witnessed something strange from all the years I've been voting in my polling station. The booth, the polling booth, one wouldn't go around and his back facing the wall. He would just go straight. The booth was facing the people, and my back was facing the people. So they would see where one's hand is going towards in the ballot paper, and that thing happened all over King Williamstown and Stutterham. I mentioned it all over a talk show radio, and there were people coming to confirm the same thing, saying that they found it very strange. Was that, is that legal or not?
Yeah, okay, thank you. We've got that question. We've got a question. We've got another caller from Attersville. Randy, good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. Yeah.
Randy, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay. I want to put this question here.
Go ahead, Randy.
Okay.
Switch off your TV. Switch off your TV.
When do you say the
Well, sorry, Randy, if you don't switch off your TV before you come on air.
It's off.
Okay, all right.
It's off. When do you say the election is free and fair?
When do you say the election is free and fair?
Yeah, because you can't say it's free and fair when some documents, some papers are still outside. And Tselane has been saying, no, the voting is free and fair. You know, remember, if I can tell you, I take you back. You remember when we... let
us first answer that question, Randy. Let's answer that question of when do you say elections are free and fair?
Well, as indicated earlier on, there are instruments that we are using to be able to make that determination. But for me, there are four main areas that are important in terms of determining the quality of the elections, and therefore I would still use the same instrument. I think it's the easier way of making people understand the context. The first one is the quality of the voters' roll. In an area where you know who qualifies and make sure that you have a document that can be able to say, these are the people who qualify, and then if any person wants to challenge it, they can be able to challenge it. We've got a credible voters' roll, which is very, very current, and it was certified for the purpose of this election on the 5th of March.
Let us go back to take one more question from the phones before we answer them all. Fasco from Bushbuck Ridge.
Yes.
Hello, Fasco. Ask your question.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm Fasco from Bushbuck Ridge. I want to know how neutral are the IEC staff? Are they falling to another party or the ruling party? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fasco. That's another question. How neutral are the employees of the ruling party? Probably we should first start with Zion's question, who asked, he says the ballot box was facing the people behind him, and they could see how his hand moves to the party he wants to choose from. I also experienced the same thing at my voting station, and probably this was done, Terry, tell us, for to discourage people from doing selfies inside. There was also that rule, because if it's at the back, people will do the selfies.
I think you've got the right logic for introducing that particular system. But we found also, because it's not necessarily a legalistic argument or logic, that introduced that particular system. So you found that in some of the voting stations it was the other way around. In some of the stations it was as it was actually described. But it is something that had actually been introduced in order to try to cap possibilities of people using cell phones in the voting stations. But it's a matter then that I think we're going to be reviewing going forward in the elections, because as you correctly pointed out, possibilities of voters
taking pictures of who they voted for to show their friends.
Yeah, that one is a problem. It's got to be discouraged. But another one, it's a situation where you can compromise the secrecy of a vote by putting the ballot booth in such a manner that people can actually be able to see where a person cast a vote.
I just wanted to stage, because over 2 minutes ago for the show, to get final words for everyone. Professor, probably we should all say, what is the test of our democracy? Is it a constituency-based system, or is it this PR system that we have? Professor De Vos, you can have a first bite on it.
Okay, so I think although many people, including the observer from Kenya, says that obviously constituency is a good system for some, in some ways, and I agree with that, I think that it is important that our system, where proportionality is the main basis for the electoral system, should be retained, because without that, there cannot be the major parties or the two largest parties will be disproportionately favored against everybody else. So it's the fairest system that there is, this pure proportional representation system. Whether we want to include in that, as we do at local government level, constituencies as well, that is something that we should debate.
Well, it's obviously going to be another discussion for another time. Unfortunately, we have run out of time as we come to the end of this show. In a quote by the late President Mandela, he says, I quote, "We do not need to ask whether we need to re-examine our electoral system so as to improve the nature of our relationship as public representatives with voters." This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and at 5 in the morning every Monday morning. From all of us here in the studio, have a happy Mother's Day and good afternoon. Thank you very much to our guests.
Thank you. That's so quick.
Yeah.